For 4 months her citizens waited, confident that the promised help from France would come in the end. They had hoped and trusted on that never-to-be-forgotten day 4 months ago when they covered themselves with glory, and their trust had not been misplaced. The masked stranger whom they had followed unto death and victory, the man who had rallied them and cheered them, who had shown them the example of intrepid valor and heroic self-sacrifice, had promised them help from France on that day, and that help had come just as he had promised. Now that he was gone from them, the burghers and the soldiers, the poor and the rich alike, even the women and the children, would have felt themselves eternally disgraced if they had surrendered their city which he had so magnificently defended. So they tightened their belts and starved, and waited with stoicism and patience for the hour of their deliverance. And every evening, when the setting sun threw a shaft of crimson light through the stately windows of Notre Dame, and the gathering dusk drew long shadows around the walls, the people of Cambray would meet on the Place d'Armes inside the citadel and pray for the return of the hero who had fought for their liberty. Men and women with pale, gaunt faces, on which hunger and privations had already drawn indelible lines. Men and women, some of whom had perhaps never before turned their thoughts to anything but material cares and material pleasures, flocked now to pray beneath the blue vault of heaven and to think of the man who had saved them from ruin and disgrace. Nobody believed that he was dead. Though many had seen him fall, they felt that he would return. God himself had given Cambray her defender in the hour of her greatest peril. God had not merely given in order to take away again. Vague rumors were afloat that the mysterious hero was none other than the Duc d'Anjou, own brother of the King of France, who one day would be sovereign lord over all the United Provinces. But as to that, no one cared. He who was gone was the defender of Cambray. As such, he was enshrined in thousands of hearts. As such, he would return one day to receive the gratitude and the love of the people who worshipped him. Roman 3. Le Carpentier draws a kindly veil over the sufferings of the unfortunate city. With pathetic exactitude, he tells us that a cow during the siege fetched as much as 300 francs, an enormous sum these days, a sheep 50 francs, an egg 40 sols, and an ounce of salt 8 sols. But he altogether omits to tell us what happened to the poor people, who had neither 50 francs nor yet 40 sols to spend. Maître Manuchet, on the other hand, assures us that at one time bread was entirely unobtainable, and that rats and mice formed a part of the daily menu of the rich. He is more crude in his statements than Le Carpentier, and even lifts for our discreet gaze just one corner of that veil, wherewith history has chosen to conceal forever the anguish of a suffering city. He shows us 3 distinct pictures, only sketched in mere outline, but with boldness and an obvious regard for truth. One of these pictures is of Jacqueline de Broyart, the wealthy heiress who shared with the departed hero the worship of the citizens of Cambray. Manuchet speaks of her as of an angel of charity, healing and soothing with words and hands and heart, as of a vision of paradise in the midst of a torturing hell, her courage and endurance a prop for drooping spirits, her voice a sweet, insistent sound above the cries of pain, the curses and the groans. Wide-eyed and pale, but with a cheering smile upon her lips, she flits through the deserted streets of Cambray, bringing the solace of her presence, the help that can be given, the food that can be shared, to many a suffering home. Of the man who hath possession of her heart, she never speaks with those in authority, but when in a humble home there is talk of the hero who has gone and of his probable return, she listens in silence, and when conjectures fly around her as to his identity, she even tries to smile. But in her heart she knows that her knight, the man whom the people worship, will never come back. France will send troops and aid and protection anon. A puissant prince will enter Cambray mayhap at the head of his troops, and be acclaimed as the savior of Cambray. She would no doubt in the fullness of time plight her troth to that man, and the people would be told that this was indeed the Duc d'Anjou et de Lincoln, who had once before stood upon the ramparts of Cambray and shouted his defiant cry, "A moi, citizens, and let the body of each one of you here be a living rampart for the defense of your homes." But she would know that the man who spoke those inspiring words had gone from her forever. Who he was, where he came from, what had brought him to Cambray under a disguise and an assumed name, she would perhaps never know. nor did she care. He was the man she loved, the man whose passionate ardor had thrilled her to the soul, whose touch had been as magic, whose voice had been perfect music set in perfect time. He was the man she loved, her knight. Throughout that day upon the ramparts she had seen him undaunted, intrepid, unconquered, rallying those who quaked, cheering those who needed help, regardless of danger, devoted even unto death. So what cared she what was his name? Whoever he was worthy of her love. Roman 4. The second picture which the historian shows us is more dispiriting and more grim. It is a picture of Cambray in the last days of July. The Spanish armies have invested the city completely for over 8 weeks, and Cambray has been thrown entirely on her own resources and the activities of a few bold spirits for the barest necessities of life. Starvation, grim and unrelenting, is taking her toll of the exhausted population. Disease begins to haunt the abodes of squalor and of misery. France has promised aid, and France still tarries. Mayhap France has forgotten long ago. In Cambray now a vast silence reigns, the silence of impending doom. The streets are deserted during the day, the church bells are silent. Only at evening, in the gloom, weird and melancholy sounds fill the air, groans and husky voices, and at times the wild shriek of some demented brain. Cambray has fought for her liberty. Now she is enduring for it, and enduring it with a fortitude and determination, which is one of the most glorious entries in the book of the recording angel. Every morning at dawn, the heralds of the Spanish commander mount the redoubt on the Bapaume road, and with a loud flourish of brass trumpets, they demand in the name of His Majesty, the King of Spain, the surrender of the rebel city. And every day the summons is answered by a grim and defiant silence, after which Cambray settles down to another day of suffering. The city fathers have worked wonders in organization. From the first, the distribution of accumulated provisions has been systematic and rigidly fair. But those distributions, from being scanty, have become wholly insufficient, and lives that before flickered feebly have gone out altogether, while others continue a mere struggle for existence, which would be degrading were its object not so sublime. Cambray will not surrender. She would sooner starve and rot and be consumed by fire, but with her integrity whole, her courage undoubted, the honor of her women unsullied. Disease may haunt her streets, famine knock at every door, but at least while her citizens have one spark of life left in their bodies, while their emaciated hands have a vestige of power wherewith to grasp a musket, no Spanish soldier shall defile her pavements, no Spanish commander work his tyrannical will with her. Cambray will not surrender. She believes in her defender and her savior. In his words, that France will presently come with invincible might and powerful armies, when all her sufferings will be turned to relief and to joy. And every evening when lights are put out, and darkness settles down upon the stricken city, wrapping under her beneficent mantle all the misery, the terrors, and the heroism, men and women lay themselves down to their broken rest with a last murmur of hope, a last invocation to God for the return of the hero in whom lies their trust. And in the town hall, the city fathers sit in council, with Messer de Balagny there and Monseigneur Dinci presiding. They too appear grimly resolved to endure and to hold out. The fire of patriotism and of enthusiasm burns in their hearts, as it does in the heart of every burgher, noble or churl in the city. But side by side with enthusiasm stalks the grim shadow of prescience, knowledge of the resources which go diminishing bit by bit, until the inevitable hour when hands and mouths will still be stretched out for food and there will be nothing left to give. Even now, it is less than bare subsistence, which can be doled out day by day, and in more than one face assembled this day around the council board, there is limned the grim line of nascent despair. It is only Dinci who has not lost one particle of his faith, one particle of self-confidence and of belief in ultimate triumph. "If ye begin to doubt," he exclaims with tragic directness, "how will ye infuse trust in the hearts of your people?" The chief magistrate shakes his head. The provosts are silent. More than one man wipes a surreptitious tear. "We must give the people something to hearten them," has been the persistent call from those in authority. De Balagny interposes. "Our spies have succeeded in evading the Spanish lines more than once. One of them returned yesterday from La Fere. He says the Duc d'Anjou is well nigh ready. The next month should see the end of our miseries. A month, sighs the chief magistrate. The people cannot hold out another month. They are on the verge of despair. They begin to murmur, adds one of the provosts glumly. And some demand that we surrender the city, concludes de Lalane. Surrender the city, exclaimed Dinchi vehemently, never. Then can Monseigneur suggest something, riposts the chief magistrate dryly, that will restore confidence to a starving population. The help from France almost within sight, urges Monseigneur. The provosts shrug their shoulders. So long delayed, one of them says, the people have ceased to believe in it. Many declare the Duke is dead, urges another. But ye know better than that, messieurs, retorts Dinchi sternly. Again, one or two of the older men shrug their shoulders. I saw him fall from the ramparts, asserts one. He was struck full in the breast by an arrow, says another, shot by an unseen hand, some abominable assassin. His Highness gave one turn and fell into the moat below. And was immediately found and picked up by some of my men, retorts de Balagny hotly. Mine oath on it, our spies have seen him, spoken with him. The Duc d'Anjou is alive and on his way to Cambray. I'd stake on it the salvation of my soul. The others sigh, some of them dubiously, others with renewed hope. From their talk we gather that not one of them has any doubt in his mind as to the identity of the brave defender of Cambray. Nothing had in truth happened to shake their faith in him, and de Balagny had said nothing to shake that faith. On that fateful day in April, they had been convened to witness the betrothal of Madame Jacqueline de Broyart to Monsieur Duc d'Anjou, had been presented to His Highness, and kissed his hands. Then suddenly all had been confusion, the panic, the surprise attack, the runaway soldiers, and finally the one man who rallied every quaking spirit and defended the city with heart and mind, with counsel and strength of arm, until he fell by an unseen assassin's hand. He, the Duc d'Anjou, of the princely house of France, the future sovereign lord of a united Netherlands. For a while there is absolute stillness in the council room. No one speaks, hardly does anyone stir. Only the massive clock over the monumental hearth ticks out every succeeding second with relentless monotony. Monseigneur is buried in thought. The others wait, respectfully silent. Then suddenly Dinchi looks up and gazes determinedly on the faces round him. Madame Jacqueline must help us, he says firmly. Madame Jacqueline, the chief magistrate exclaims, how? On the place d'armes, one evening during the intercession, Monseigneur goes on, speaking rapidly and with unhesitating resolve. She will make a solemn declaration before the assembled people, plight her troth to the Duc d'Anjou, who, though still absent, has sent her a token of his immediate arrival. Sent her a token, most of them murmur, astonished, and even de Balagny frowns in puzzlement. Yes, rejoins Dinchi impatiently. Cannot you see? You say the people no longer believe in the coming of His Highness. Our spies and the news they bring no longer carry weight. But if we say that the Duke hath sent a token. I understand, murmurs the chief magistrate, and the others nod in comprehension. Madame Jacqueline will not demur, Dinchi continues insistently. She will accept the assurance from me that one of our spies has come in contact with Monsieur and brought back a fresh token of his promise to her, a ring, for instance. We have many valuable ones in our city treasury. One of them will serve our purpose. Then, as the city dignitaries are still silent, somewhat perturbed at all that sophistry, 'tis for the sake of our city, messieurs, Dinchi urges with a note of pleading in his usually commanding voice. A little deception, when so much good may come of it. What is it? Surely you can reconcile it with your consciences. To him the matter seems trivial, one deception more or less. Hitherto the path had been so easy. He frowns, seeing that this tiresome pack of old men hesitate, when to acquiesce might even now save their city. Anyhow, he is the governor. His word is law. For the nonce he chooses to argue and to persuade, but anon he commands. The city dignitaries, the old men for the most part, and with impaired health after weeks of privation, have but little real resistance in them. Dinchi was always a man of arbitrary will and persuasive eloquence. De Balagny is soon won over. He ranges himself on the side of the governor, and helps in the work of demolishing the bulwark of the magistrate's opposition. The latter yields, reluctantly perhaps, but still he yields. After all, there is no harm whatever in the deception. No one could possibly suffer in consequence. Madame Jacqueline has always expressed herself ready to marry the Duc d'Anjou, a hero and a doughty knight, if ever there was one. And in any case, it were an inestimable boon to put fresh heart into the starving population. So gradually the others yield, and Monseigneur is satisfied. He elaborates his plan, his mind full of details to make the result more sure. A public ceremony, Jacqueline once more publicly betrothed to the Duc d'Anjou, dedicated, in fact, like a worshipper to some patron saint. Then the people made to realize that the Duc d'Anjou is already known to them as their hero, their defender and their savior, that he is not dead, but coming back to them very soon at the head of his armies this time, to save them once for all from the Spaniards, whilst he remains with them to the end of his days as their chosen sovereign lord and king. Monseigneur has worked himself up to a high pitch of enthusiasm, carries the others with him now, until they cast aside all foreboding and gloom, and hope springs afresh in their hearts. Romans 6. Thus we see the third and last picture which Enguerrand de Manuchet shows us of Cambray in her agony. It is a picture that is even more vivid than the others, more alive in the intensity of its pathos. We see inside the citadel on the last day of July, 1581. And of all the episodes connected with the memorable siege of Cambray and with its heroic defense, not one perhaps is more moving than that of this huge concourse of people, men, women, and tiny children, assembled here, and for such a purpose, under the blue dome of the sky. The grim walls of the ancient castle around them are hung with worn and tattered flags. They are like the interior of a church, decked out with all the solemnity of a marriage ceremony and all the pathos of a de profundis. Jacqueline, indifferent to everything save to the welfare of the city, has accepted without resistance or doubt Monseigneur's story of the spy, the Duc d'Anjou, and the token. The ring, borrowed for the occasion from the city treasury, she has taken without any misgiving, as coming straight from the man whom she is destined to marry. She had promised long ago to wed Monsieur Duc d'Anjou, because the weal of her country was, it seems, wrapped up in that union. All those who worked for the glorious future of Flanders had assured her that much of it depended in her acquiescence to this alliance with France. With her heart forever buried beneath the ramparts of Cambray, side by side with the gallant knight who had given his life for the beloved city, she cared little, if at all, what became of her. The Duc d'Anjou or another, what did it matter? But preferably the Duc d'Anjou if her country's welfare demands that he should be the man. No wonder that this last picture stirs even the heart of the dry-as-dust old historian to enthusiasm. Noble and churl, burghers and dignitaries and soldiers, toilers and ragamuffins, all are there, those who can walk or stand or crawl, those who are hail drag or support those that are sick, bring tattered mattresses along or a litter of straw for them to lie on. But they all come to see a woman make a solemn profession of faith in the man who is to bring deliverance to the agonizing city. They come in their thousands, but thousands more are unable to find room upon the place or within the citadel. Even so, they line the streets all the way to the archiepiscopal palace, whilst all those who are so privileged watch Madame Jacqueline's progress through the streets from their windows or their balconies. Fortunately, the day has been brilliantly fine ever since morning, and the sun shines radiant upon this one day, which is almost a happy one. For many hours before that fixed for the ceremony, the streets seethed with the crowd, a pathetic crowd, in truth, gaunt, feeble, weary, in tattered clothes, some scarce able to drag themselves along, others sick and emaciated, clinging to the posts at the corners of the streets, just to get one peep at what has come to be regarded as a tangible ray of hope. A silent, moveless crowd, whose husky voice has scarce a cheer in it, as Jacqueline passes by, walking between Monseigneur the governor and the chief magistrate, bare arms are waved here and there in a feeble attempt at jubilation. But there is no music, no beating of drums or waving of banners. There is no almsgiving, no largesse. All that the rich and the prosperous possessed in the past has been shared and distributed long ago. In spite of the brilliant weather, the scene is dark and dreary. The weary, begrimed faces do not respond to the joyous kiss of the sun. The smile of hope has not the power to dry every tear. Romans 7. And now Jacqueline stands, like a white Madonna lily, in the center of the place d'armes. Monseigneur the governor is beside her, and around her are grouped the high dignitaries of the city, standing or sitting upon low velvet-covered stools. The chief magistrate and Messer de Balligny are in the forefront, and behind them are the members of the States General and of the town, the provosts and captains of the city guard. The picture is somber still, despite the banners of the guilds and the flags of various provinces which hang along the walls of the citadel. The russets and browns, the blacks and dull reds, absorb the evening light without throwing back any golden reflections. The shadows are long and dense. The white satin of Jacqueline's gown is the one bright note of color against the dull and drab background. Its stiff folds gleam with honey-colored lights in the slowly sinking sun. She has allowed old Nicole to deck her out in all her finery, the gown which she wore on that night, oh, so very long ago, at the banquet, the one with the pale green underdress which Messer declared made her look so like a lily, the pearls in her hair, the velvet shoes on her feet. "I will plight my troth publicly to the defender of Cambray," she had said to her guardian when Monseigneur had first spoken of the proposed ceremony. "To Monsieur Duc d'Anjou et de Lincoln, my child," Monseigneur had insisted, and frowned slightly at what he called his ward's romantic fancies. "'Tis to the defender of Cambray that I will dedicate my faith," she had continued obstinately. "Let the child be," de Laline had interposed, seeing that Dinchy was about to lose his temper. "After all, what does it matter, seeing that the defender of Cambray and Monsieur Duc d'Anjou are one and the same?" Dinchy gave in. It did not really matter. If Jacqueline still harbored a doubt as to the identity of the masked stranger, it would soon be dispelled when Monsieur entered Cambray and came to claim her openly. Women were apt to have strange fancies, and this one, on Jacqueline's part, was harmless enough. In any case, she appeared satisfied, and henceforth was quite submissive. In the midst of her sorrow, she felt a sweet, sad consolation in the thought that she would publicly plight her troth to the man whom she loved, proclaim before the whole world, her world that is, the only one that mattered, that she was forever affianced to the brave man who had given his life, that Cambray might be saved. In an inward vision she could see him still, as she saw him on that day upon the ramparts, with the April sun gilding his close-cropped head, with the light of enthusiasm dancing in his eyes, his arms bare, his clothes torn, his vibrant voice resounding from wall to wall and from bastion to bastion, till something of his own fire was communicated to all those who fought under his command. To Jacqueline he was still so marvelously, so powerfully alive, even though his body lay stark and still at the foot of those walls which he had so bravely defended. He seemed to be smiling down on her from the clear blue of the sky, to nod at her with those banners which he had helped to keep unsullied before the foe. She heard his voice through the lengthy perorations of Monseigneur, the murmured approbation of the provosts, through the cheers of the people. She felt his presence now as she had felt it through the past 4 weary months, while Cambray suffered and starved, and bore starvation and misery with that fortitude which he had infused into her. And while Monseigneur the governor spoke his preliminary harangue, to which the people listened in silence, she stood firm and ready to speak the words which, in accordance with the quaint and ancient Flemish custom, would betroth her irrevocably to the man chosen for her by her guardians, even though he happened to be absent at the moment. For her, those words, the solemn act, would only register the vow which she had made long ago, the vow which bound her soul forever to the hero who had gone. "It is my purpose," Monseigneur said solemnly, "to plight this my lawful ward, Jacqueline, Dame de Broyart et de Morquepont, Duchesse et Princess de Rémise, d'Espion et de Wargny, unto His Royal Highness, Hercule François de Valois, Duc de Lincoln et d'Anjou, and I hereby desire to ask the members of my council to give their consent to this decree." And the chief magistrate, speaking in the name of the States General and of the City and Provincial Council, then gave answer. "Before acceding to your request, Monseigneur, we demand to know whether Hercule François Valois, Duc de Lincoln et d'Anjou, is an honorable man, and possessed of sufficient goods to ensure that Madame Jacqueline de Broyart et de Morquepont, Duchesse et Princess de Rémise, d'Espion et de Wargny, continue to live, as she hath done hitherto, and in a manner befitting her rank. Whereupon Messieurs de Balagny made reply, His Royal Highness is a prince of the House of France. He defended our city in the hour of her gravest peril, and saved her from destruction and from the fury of our Spanish foe. He is in every way worthy to have our ward for wife. Wherefore, most honourable seigneurs, continued the governor solemnly, I do desire by your favour to grant the hand of Madame Jacqueline to him in marriage. This request we would grant you, Monseigneur, rejoined the chief magistrate, but would ask you first how it comes that the bridegroom himself is not here to claim his bride. The bridegroom, replied Dinchi, slowly and loudly, so that his voice could be heard, clear and distinct, in every corner of the great courtyard. The bridegroom is even at this hour within sight of our beleaguered city. He is at the head of his armies, and only waits a favorable opportunity for demanding from the Spanish commander that the latter do give him battle. The bridegroom, I say, hath sent us a token of his goodwill, and an assurance that he will not tarry. He hath asked that Madame Jacqueline do plight her troth to him before the assembled people of Cambray, so that they may know that he is true and faithful unto them, and take heart of courage against his speedy coming for their deliverance. A murmur it could not be called a cheer, for voices were hoarse and spent went the round of the crowd. There were nods of approval, and a gleam of hope, almost of joy, lit up many a wan face and many a sunken eye. After so many deceptions, so much weary waiting and hope deferred, this was at least something tangible, something to cling to, whilst battling against the demons of hunger and disease which so insidiously called for surrender. The chief magistrate, who together with Monseigneur had been chiefly instrumental in engineering the present situation, waited for a moment or two, giving time for the governor's cheering words to soak well into the minds of the people. He was a tall, venerable-looking old burgher, with a white beard clipped close to his long, thin face, and a black velvet bonnet, now faded to a greenish hue by exposure to all weathers, set upon his scanty hair. He drew up his bent shoulders and threw back his head with a gesture expressive both of confidence and of determination, and he allowed his deep-set eyes beneath their bushy brows to wander over the populace, as if to say, See how right I was to bid you hope. Here you have an actual proof that the end of your sufferings is in sight, that the deliverance for which you pray is already at your gate. After which, he turned once again to Dinchi and said loftily, Monseigneur the Governor, the people of Cambray here assembled have heard with profound respect the declaration which you have deigned to make, as to the intentions of His Royal Highness, the Duc d'Anjou et de Lincoln. On their behalf, and on the behalf of the states of this town and province whom I represent, I hereby affirm most solemnly that we have the weal of our city at heart, that we will resist the armies of the Duke of Parma with the whole might of our arms and our will, awaiting tranquilly and with fortitude the hour of our deliverance. We trust and believe that he who defended us so valiantly 4 months ago will soon return to us, and rid us once and for ever from the menace of our foe. Once more a murmur of approval went round the place. Wearied, aching heads nodded approval, firm lips, thin and pale, were set with a recrudescence of energy. All the stoicism of this heroic race was expressed in their simple acceptance of this fresh term of endurance imposed upon them, in their willingness to hope on again, to wait and to submit, and in their mute adhesion to the profession of faith loudly proclaimed by their chief dignitary, awaiting tranquilly and with fortitude the hour of our deliverance. And now, Monseigneur, concluded the magistrate impressively, in the name of your council, I herewith make acceptance of His Royal Highness, Hercule Francois Valois, Duc de Lincoln et d'Anjou, Prince of the House of France, defender and savior of Cambray, to be the future husband and guardian of Madame Jacqueline de Broyat, our ward. Monseigneur the Governor now drew his sword, held it upright and placed on it a hat, and round his arm a mantle. Then he took the ring, which had been borrowed from the city treasury for the occasion, and hung it on a projecting ornament of his sword hilt. After which he said, with great solemnity, With these emblems I hereby entrust to His Royal Highness Hercule Francois de Valois, Duc d'Anjou et de Lincoln, Prince of the House of France, the defender and savior of Cambray in the hour of her gravest peril, the custody of my ward Jacqueline, Dame de Broyat et de Morquepont, Duchesse et Princess de Rémise, d'Espion et de Wargny, and as I have been her faithful custodian in the past, so do I desire him to become her guardian and protector henceforth, taking charge of her worldly possessions and duly administering them faithfully and loyally." After which he lowered his sword, put down the hat and the mantle, and presented the ring to Jacqueline, together with 7 gloves, saying the while, "Jacqueline, take these in exchange for the emblems of marital authority, which I herewith hold for and on behalf of your future lord, and in the presence of all the people of Cambray here assembled, I demand that you do plight your troth to him, and that you swear to be true and faithful unto him, to love and cherish him with your heart and your body, to obey and serve him loyally as his wife and helpmate until death." Jacqueline, by all the canons of this quaint custom, should have held the ring and the gloves in her left hand and taken the solemn oath with her right raised above her head. Instead of which, Manuscript assures us that she laid down the ring and the gloves upon the chair nearest to her and clasped her 2 hands together as if in prayer. She raised her small head and looked out upon the sky, there where the setting sun hid its glory behind a filmy veil of rose-tinted clouds. "In the name of the living God who made me," she said, with solemn and earnest fervor, "I do hereby plight my troth to my lord, the noble and puissant hero who defended Cambray in the hour of her gravest peril, who saved her from destruction and taught her citizens how to conquer and to endure, and I swear upon my life and upon my every hope of salvation that I will be true and faithful unto him, that I will love and cherish him with my heart and with my body, and will serve him loyally and unswervingly now and always, until our souls meet in the presence of God." A great hush had fallen on the vast courtyard while Jacqueline de Broyat made her profession of faith, nor did a sound mar the perfect stillness which lay over the heavy-laden city. This was a time of great silences, silence of sorrow, of anxiety and pain. The women frankly gave way to tears, but they were tears that fell soundlessly from hollow eyes. The men did not weep, they just set their teeth and culled in that one woman's fervor fresh power for their own endurance. The city dignitaries crowded round Jacqueline, kissing and pressing her hands. Monseigneur the governor was looking greatly relieved. From the tower of Notre Dame, the bells set forth a joyous peal, the first that had been heard for many months. And that peal was presently taken up, first by one church tower and then another, from St. Wast to St. Martin's Stee, Croix to St. Jury. The happy sound echoed and reverberated along the city walls, broke with its insidious melody the gloomy silence which had lain over the streets like a pall. Far away in the west, the sun was slowly sinking in a haze of translucent crimson, and tipped every church spire, every bastion and redoubt with rose and orange and gold. For the space of a few more minutes, the citadel with its breathless and fervid crowd, with its waving banners and grey walls, was suffused as with a flush of life and hope. Then the shadows lengthened, longer and longer they grew, deeper and more dense, like great drab arms that enfold and conceal and smother. Slowly, the crimson glow faded out of the sky. Now the group in the center appeared only like a somber mass of dull and lifeless colors. Jacqueline's white satin gown took on a leaden hue. The brilliance of the sky had become like a presage of storm. The women shivered beneath their ragged kerchiefs. Some of the children started to cry. Then one by one, the crowd began to disperse. Walking, halting, crawling, they wended their way back to their dreary homes, there to wait again, to suffer and to endure, there to conceal all the heroism of this patient resignation, all the stoicism of a race which no power could conquer, no tyranny force into submission. And once more silence descended on the hapless city, and the mantle of night lay mercifully upon her grievous wounds. Roman 8. And far away in the Spanish camps, the soldiers and their captains marveled how joy bells could be ringing in a city which was in the throes of her death agony. But the Duke of Parma knew what it meant, as did the members of his staff, Del Fuente, his second in command, de Salvado, Bracamont, de Landes, and the others. More than one of their wily spies had succeeded before now in swimming across the Schelde and in scaling the tumble-down walls of the heroic city, and had brought back the news of what was doing in there, in the midst of a starving and obstinate population. "The public betrothal to a fickle prince who will never come," said the Duke grimly between his teeth. "At any rate, not before we have worked our will with those mulish rebels." "We could take their pestilent town by storm tomorrow," remarked de Landers, with a note of fierce hatred in his voice, "if your highness would but give the order." "Bah," retorted the duke, "let them rot. Why should we waste valuable lives and precious powder when the next few days must see the final surrender of that peccant rat-hole?" He gave a coarse laugh and shrugged his shoulders. "I believe," he said to de Landers, "that I once promised you Cambray and all that it contains." "What?" "For ridding your highness of the abominable rebel who organized the defense last April," assented de Landers. "Yes, Cambray and all that it contains was to be my reward." "You killed the miscreant, I believe." "I shot him through the heart. He lies rotting now beneath the walls." "Well," riposted the duke, "you earned your reward easily enough. There will be plenty left in Cambray, even after I have had my first pick of its treasures." De Landers made no protest. It would have been not only useless, but also impolitic to remind his highness that, at the moment when he offered Cambray and all its contents to the man who would rid him of a valiant foe, he had made no proviso that he himself should fill his pockets first. There was no honor among these thieves and no probity in these savage tyrants, brute beasts, most of them, who destroyed and outraged whatever resisted their might. So de Landers held his tongue, for even so he was not dissatisfied. The duke, being rid of the rebel whom he feared, might easily have repudiated the ignoble bargain in its entirety, and de Landers would have had no redress. As it was, there was always Jacqueline. The Spanish commanders were wont to make short shrift of Flemish heiresses who happened to be in a city which they entered as conquerors. By decree of his highness, Jacqueline de Broyart would certainly be allocated to him, de Landers, if he chose to claim her. Of a truth, she was still well worth having, more so than ever, perhaps, for her spirit now would be chastened by bodily privations, broken by humiliation at the hands of the faithless Valois and by the death of her mysterious lover. "So long as the heiress is there for me," he said carelessly to the duke, "I am satisfied to let every other treasure go." "Oh, you shall have the heiress," riposted his highness hilariously. "Rumor hath described her as passing fair. You lucky devil, methinks you were even betrothed to her once." "Oh, long ago, your highness. Since then the oily promises of the Duc d'Anjou have helped to erase my image from the tablets of Madame Jacqueline's heart." "Then she'll be all the more ready to fall back into your arms, now that she has discovered the value of a Valois prince's faith." After which pronouncement, the Duke of Parma dismissed the matter from his mind and turned his attention to the table, richly spread with every kind of delicacy, which had been laid for him in his tent. He invited the gentlemen of his staff to sit, and as he dug his fork into the nearest succulent dish, he said complacently, "Those pestiferous rebels out there cannot have as much as a mouse between the lot of them to fill their Flemish paunches. Messeigneurs, here is to Cambray," he added, as he lifted his silver goblet filled to the brim with Rhenish wine. "To Cambray when we march through her streets, ransack her houses and share her gold. To Cambray and the pretty Flemish wenches, if so be they have an ounce of flesh left upon their bones. To de Landers' buxom heiress and his forthcoming marriage with her. To you all, and the spoils which these many months of weary waiting will help you to enjoy. To Cambray, all ye gallant seigneurs." His lusty toast was greeted with loud laughter. Metal goblets clicked one against the other. Every one drank to the downfall of the rebellious city. De Landers accepted the jocose congratulations of his boon companions. He, too, raised his goblet aloft, and having shouted, "To Jacqueline," drained it to its last drop. But when he set the goblet down, his hand was shaking perceptibly. Cain-like, he had seen a vision of the man whom he had so foully murdered. Accidentally, he knocked over a bottle of red Burgundy, which stood on the table close by, and the linen cloth all around him was spread over with a dark crimson stain, which to the assassin appeared like the color of blood. Chapter 26. What value a Valois prince set upon his word. To Gilles de Crohin, when he woke to consciousness one morning in his former lodging in La Fere, the whole of the past few weeks appeared indeed like a long dream. Cambray, Jacqueline, his mask, his deceit, that last day upon the ramparts, were they not all the creations of his fevered brain? Surely a whole lifetime could not be crowded into so short a space of time. No man could have lived through so much, loved so passionately, have lost and fought and conquered so strenuously, all within a few weeks. And when, after many days enforced rest and a good deal of attention from a skillful lech backed by Maître Jehan's unwavering care, he was once more on his feet and was able to relate to Madame la Reine de Navarre the many vicissitudes of his perilous adventure, it seemed to him as if he were recounting to a child fairy tales and dream stories which had never been. It was only at evening, when he wandered round the little Dutch garden at the back of the house where he lodged, that Jacqueline came to him, aglow with life, a living, breathing, exquisite reality. For the Madonna lilies were all abloom in that garden just then, tall, stately white lilies, which bordered one of the narrow paths. They had slender, pale green stems, their fragrance filled the evening air, and the soft breeze stirred their delicate crowns. Then it would seem to Gilles, as if his Jacqueline were walking down the path beside him, that the breeze blew the tendrils of her fair hair against his nostrils, and that her voice filled his ear with its sweet, melodious sound. A big heartache would make the rough soldier sigh with longing then. Unseen by anyone, alone with his thoughts of her, he would stretch out his arms to that tantalizing vision which seemed so real and was yet so far, so very far away. Madame la Reine would at times chaff him about his moodiness, and he himself was ready to laugh aloud at his own folly. What right had he, the uncouth soldier of fortune, the homeless adventurer, to think of the great and noble lady who was as far removed from him as were the stars? What right indeed, even though Marguerite de Navarre, lavish in her gratitude, had already showered honors and wealth upon the man who had served her so faithfully. Monseigneur le Prince de Froidmont, she had said to him with solemn earnestness, on the day when first she had realized how completely he had worked out her own schemes. The lands of Froidmonti, which are some of the richest in Aquitaine, were a part of my dowry when I married. They are yours now, as they once were the property of your forebears. They are yours, with their forests, their streams, and their castles. Take them as a poor token of my lifelong gratitude. And when Gilles demurred, half indifferent even to so princely a gift, she added with her habitual impatience, "Pardieu, monsieur, why should you be too proud to accept a gift from me, seeing that I was not too proud to ask so signal a service of you?" Even so, that gift, so graciously offered, so welcome to the man's pride of ancestry, had but little value in his sight, since he could not do with it the one thing that mattered, which was to lay it at Jacqueline's feet. "Do not look so morose, monsieur," Marguerite de Navarre said teasingly. "I vow that you have left your heart captive in Cambray." Then as Gilles, after this straight hit, remained silent and absorbed, she added gaily, "Have no fear, monsieur. When monsieur is lord of the Netherlands, he will force the lady of your choice into granting you her favors. Remember," she said more seriously, "that the Prince de Froidmont can now aspire to the hand of the richest and most exalted lady in the land." "Monseigneur is still far from being lord of the Netherlands," Gilles said dryly, chiefly with a view to inducing a fresh train of thought in the royal lady's mind. Marguerite shrugged her pretty shoulders. "He still procrastinates," she admitted. "He should be at La Fère by now with 5,000 troops. Everything was ready when I left Paris." "He has found something else to distract him," rejoined Gilles with unconscious bitterness. "Perhaps MME de Marquette has resumed her sway over him, the while Cambray waits and starves." "Chin Sabe," allowed Madame la Reine with an impatient sigh. Roman 2. The while Cambray waits and starves. That was indeed the deathly sting which poisoned Gilles de Crohin's very life during those 4 dreary months, while Monsieur Duc d'Anjou was ostensibly making preparations for his expedition for the relief of the beleaguered city. Ostensibly, in truth, for very soon his fond sister had to realize that, now as always, that fickle brother of hers was playing his favorite game of procrastination and faithlessness. With him, in fact, faithlessness had become an obsession. It seemed as if he could not act or think straight, as if he could not keep his word. Now, while he was supposed to recruit his troops, to consult with his officers, to provide for engines and munitions of war, he actually deputed his long-suffering and still faithful friend, Gilles de Crohin, to do the work for him. His own thoughts had once more turned to a possible marriage, not with Jacqueline de Broyart, to whom he was bound by every conceivable tie of honor and of loyalty, but with Elizabeth of England, whom he coveted because of her wealth, and the power which so brilliant an alliance would place in his hands. But of these thoughts he did not dare to speak even to the adoring sister, who most certainly would have turned her back on him forever had she known that he harbored such dishonorable projects. He did not dare to speak of them even to Gilles, for he felt that this would strain his friend's loyalty to breaking point. He entered outwardly into the spirit of the proposed expedition with all the zest which he could muster, but the moment he was no longer under Marguerite de Navarre's own eyes, he did not lift another finger in its organization. Turenne and La Vout are quite capable of going to the relief of Cambray without me, he said to Gilles with a yawn and a lazy stretch of his long, loose limbs. I have never been counted a good commander, and Parma is always a difficult problem to tackle. Let Turenne go, I say. My brother Henry lauds him as the greatest general of the day, and the rogue hath fought on the Spanish side before now, so he hath all their tricks at his fingers' ends. Monsieur was in Paris then, and Marguerite de Navarre, well-nigh distraught, had entreated Gilles to stir him into immediate activity. Cambray will fall before that indolent brother of mine gets there, monsieur, she had pleaded, with tears of impotent anger in her eyes. Gilles had gone, he needed no goad even for so distasteful a task. Cambray might fall, the thought drove him into a fever, from which he could find no solace save in breathless activity. He found Monsieur in his palace in Paris, surrounded by the usual crowd of effeminate youngsters and idle women, decked out in newfangled, impossible clothes, the creations of his own fancy, indolent, vicious, incorrigible. Just now, when Gilles had come to speak to him of matters that meant life or death, honor or shame, the future welfare or downfall of a nation, he was lounging in a huge armchair, his feet resting on a pile of cushions. He was wearing one of his favorite satin suits, with slashed doublet all covered with tags and ribbons. He had gold earrings in his ears and was nursing a litter of tiny hairless puppies, whom he was teasing with the elaborate insignia of the Order of the Holy Ghost, wrought in gold and set with diamonds, which he wore on a blue riband round his neck. Gilles looked down on him with a contempt that was no longer good-humored. Cambray was waiting and starving whilst this miserable coxcomb idled away the hours. 2 months had gone by, and practically nothing had been done. There were no troops, no munitions, no arms, and Cambray was waiting and starving. God alone knew what miseries were being endured by those valiant burghers over there, whom Gilles' own voice had so easily rallied once to a stubborn and heroic defense. God alone knew what his exquisite Jacqueline was being made to suffer. At the thought, his very soul writhed in torment. He could have raised his hands in measureless anger against that effeminate nincompoop, and crushed the last spark of a profligate and useless life out of him. As it was, he had to entreat, to argue, almost to kneel, pleading the cause of Cambray and of his proud Jacqueline, his perfect and unapproachable Lily, whom this miserable rag of manhood was casting aside and spurning with a careless wave of the hand. Ye gods, that he of all men should have been assigned such a role, that fate should have destined him to plead for the very honor and safety of the woman whom he worshipped, with a man whom he despised. And yet he argued and he entreated, because Madame la Reine herself vowed that no one could keep her brother in the path of integrity now, except his friend Gilles de Crohin. She had begged him not to leave Monsieur, not for a day, not if possible for an hour. He will give us the slip again, she begged most earnestly, and be off to England after his wild goose chase. Elizabeth will never marry him, never, and we shall remain before the world, uselessly discredited and shamed. Alas, much precious time had in the meanwhile been lost. News had come through that the Duke of Parma had given up the thought of taking Cambray by storm and had left Del Fuente in temporary command with orders to reduce her by starvation. But this was 2 months ago. Marguerite de Navarre, wearied to death, harassed by Monsieur's inactivity, obstructed by the King of France, was on the verge of despair. Cambray, according to the most haphazard calculations, must be on the point of surrender. Roman 3. Early in July, Monsieur, stung into a semblance of activity by perpetual nagging from his sister and constant goading from Gilles, did send M. de Turenne with an insufficient force, ill-equipped and ill-found, to effect a surprise attack against the Spanish army. We know how signally that failed. The blame naturally was lavishly distributed. M. de Turenne, ignorant of his ground, had, it was averred, employed guides who led him astray. Spies and traitors amongst his troops were also supposed to have got wind of his plans and to have betrayed them to the Spanish commander. Certain it is that Turenne's small force was surprised, cut up, Turenne himself taken prisoner, and that Lavaut, his second, only escaped a like fate by disguising himself as a woman and running with the best of them back to La Fère. The blow had fallen, sudden, swift, and terrible. When the news was brought to Marguerite of Navarre, she was seized with so awful an attack of choler that she fell into unconsciousness and had to take to her bed. She sent for Gilles, who was eating out his heart in Paris, playing the watchdog over a dissolute prince. At her command, he proceeded at once to La Fère. "All is not lost, Mesca," she said to him, as soon as his calm, trust-inspiring presence had infused some semblance of hope into her heart. "But we must not allow Monsieur to exert himself any more in the matter. His incapacity alone matches his indolence." She felt so ashamed and so humiliated that Gilles well-nigh forgot the grudge, which he really owed her for that pitiable adventure into which she had thrust him, and which was even now ending in disaster. "My spirit is well-nigh broken," she continued, with pathetic self-depreciation. "If only, out of all this misery, we could save one shred of our honor." "Will your Majesty let me try?" Gilles said simply. "What do you mean?" she riposted. "Let me gather an army together. Let me do battle against the Duke of Parma. Monseigneur hath proved himself unwilling. We court disaster by allowing him thus to fritter away both time and men. It was Turenne yesterday. It will be Condé tomorrow, or Montmorency or Bussy, anybody, any unfortunate or incompetent who is willing to serve him." "In God's name, Madame la Reine," urged Gilles with a tone of bitter reproach, "do not let us procrastinate any longer. Cambray is in her death agony. Let me go to her aid." She made a final, half-hearted protest. "No, no," she said. "You must not leave your post. If you do not keep watch over Monsieur, we shall lose him altogether." "Better that," he retorted grimly, "than that we should lose Cambray." "There you are right, Mesca. Cambray now is bound up with our honor." She had become like a child, so different to her former self-assured, almost arrogant self. Gilles, whose firm purpose gave him the strength, had little ado to mold her to his will. She had become malleable, yielding, humble in her helplessness. Marguerite de Navarre was actually ready to listen to advice, to let another think for her and scheme. She accepted counsel with a blindness and submissiveness which were truly pathetic. And Gilles, with the vision before him of Jacqueline enduring all the horrors of a protracted siege, was experiencing a semblance of happiness at thought that at last he would have the power of working for her. So he set to with a will to make the harassed queen see eye to eye with him, to make her enter into his ideas and his plans. "Your Majesty," he said, "has offered me the richest lands in Aquitaine. I entreat you to take them back and to give me their worth in money, and I'll gather together an army that will know how to fight. Then, when we are sure of victory, Monsieur can come and himself take command. But in the meanwhile, we will beat the Duke of Parma and relieve Cambray. This I swear to you by the living God." Marguerite was soon swept off her feet by his determination and his enthusiasm. With naive surrender, she laid down her burden and left Gilles to shoulder it. Now at last he could work for his Jacqueline. He could fight for her, die for her when the time came. He could drive the foe from her gates and bequeath to her, ere he fell, the freedom of the country she loved so well. Night and day he toiled, not only with heart and will, but with the frenzy of despair, while Marguerite, ever hopeful, ever deluded where that contemptible brother of hers was concerned, flew to Paris to keep a watch over him, then back to La Fère to concert with Gilles, hoping against hope that all would still be well, ready to forgive Monsieur even for the 70 times 7th time, confident that she would still see him entering Cambray and marching thence from city to city, the chosen lord of the Netherlands, more puissant than any king. Roman 4. On the last day of July, Gilles de Crohin had his forces ready, equipped, armed, provisioned at La Fère, where Marguerite de Navarre came herself in order to wish him and the expedition Godspeed. But Monsieur, who had promised, nay sworn, he would come too, in order to take command in person at the last, when victory was assured, Monsieur had not arrived. For 2 se'nights, the devoted sister and the faithful friend waited for him, but he did not come. Marguerite sent courier upon courier after him to Paris, but he evaded them all, and at one time nobody knew where he had hidden himself. To his other vices and failings, this descendant of a once noble race had added the supreme act of a coward. What that final weary waiting meant for Gilles, not even a voracious chronicler can describe. With Cambray almost in sight, with the Spanish armies not 2 leagues away, with his Jacqueline enduring every horror and every misery which the aching heart of an absent lover can conjure up before his tortured mind, he was forced to remain in idleness, eating out his heart in regret, remorse, and longing, doubtful as to what the future might bring, tortured even with the fear that, mayhap, in Cambray only a flower-covered mound of earth would mark the spot where his Jacqueline slept the last sleep of eternal rest. Then at last, upon the 14th day of August, a letter came by runner from Monsieur, for the Queen of Navarre. It had been written in Paris more than a week ago, and obviously had been purposely delayed. It began with many protestations of goodwill, of love for his sister, and of confidence in his friend. Then the letter went on in a kind of peevish strain. "I am quite convinced, my dear sister, that I am altogether unfit for the kind of attack which the present situation demands. Now Gilles has a great deal more energy than I have, and a great deal more knowledge. As you know, I never had any longing for military glory, and feel absolutely no desire to make a state entry into Cambray with a swarm of starved or diseased Flemings hanging to my stirrup leathers. Let Gilles to all that. He seems to have had a liking for that unsavory crowd. Then by and by, if the Spaniards, in the meanwhile, do not frustrate his designs by giving him a beating, I shall be ready to take up once more the negotiations for my proposed sovereignty of the Netherlands. But understand, my dear sister, that this happy event must come to pass without the co-operation of a Flemish bride. Frankly, I have no liking for the race, and would be jeopardizing my whole future by selling myself to the first Dutch wench that an untoward fate would throw in my way. In Trenus, Elizabeth of England has not been so haughty with me of late. Get me that kingdom of the Netherlands by all means, my dear. I verily believe that this accrued dignity would ensure the favorable acceptance of my suit by the English Queen." Marguerite had never made any secret before Gilles of her brother's perfidy. Even this infamous letter she placed loyally before him now. When he had finished reading it, and she saw the look of measureless contempt which flashed through his eyes, she could have cried with shame and misery. "What to do, Monsieur?" she exclaimed piteously. "Oh, my God, what to do?" "Relieve Cambray first and foremost, madame," he replied firmly. "After that we shall see." "But the Flemish lords," she rejoined, "their anger, their contempt, I could not bear it, Monsieur. The shame of it all will kill me." "It has got to be borne, madame. Cambray has suffered enough. It is our turn now." Nor would he discuss the matter any further, even with her. The expedition had been entrusted to his hands, and nothing would delay him now. Cambray was waiting and starving. Every hour might mean her final surrender. The Spanish commander, apprised of Monsieur le Duc d'Anjou's arrival with a strong force, had already offered battle. Gilles was only too eager to accept the issue. On the 15th day of August, 1581, that battle was fought on the plains outside Cambray. The issue was never in doubt for one moment. Le Carpentier asserts that the Duke of Parma, after 6 hours' stubborn fighting, surrendered his position and all his forts, and retired in great haste in the direction of Valenciennes. Chapter 27. And this is the end of my story. And into the silent desolation of Cambray's deserted streets, there penetrated once again the sounds of that life which was teeming outside her walls. From the north and the south, from the east and the west, rumor, like a wily sprite, flew over the crumbling walls and murmured into ears that scarcely heard that the promise given long ago was being redeemed at last. Anxiety, sorrow, and suffering were coming to an end, so the elf averred. The hero who fought and conquered once had returned to conquer again. Whereupon, those who had enough strength left in them to drag themselves along found their way to the ramparts, from whence they could watch the approach of the man who would bring them liberty if he succeeded, or bequeathed them an heroic death if he failed. There was no other issue possible. The sands of Cambray's endurance had run down. She had no more resistance left in her, scarcely the power to suffer any longer. If the relieving army failed today, the setting sun would see the Spanish soldiery, drunk with victory, swarming over the lonely streets, destroying all that famine and disease had left whole, all that a dying population had no longer the strength to defend. Little could be seen of what went on in the distant plain, and hollow eyes, wearied with weeping and anxiety, scanned in vain the horizon far away. But those who had come to watch remained to pray, while their minds, rendered supersensitive by bodily want, conjured up visions of that grim fight which was going on beyond their range of vision. The history of this heroic people has no more poignant page than that which tells of this long watch by a crowd of miserable, half-starved people, the while, out there upon the plain, brave men fought and died for their sake. Not only for their sake, but for the honor of France. Roman 2. Once more the roar of artillery and of musketry fills the air with its awe-inspiring sound. It is early morning, and the sky heavily overcast. To the anxious watchers, that grim struggle out there is only a dimly perceived confusion, a medley of sights and sounds, a clash of arms, the dull thunder of culverins, and sharp report of musketry. And as the gray light of day begins to pick out with crude precision the more distant objects, a kaleidoscope of color vies in brilliancy with the flash of steel, and tears asunder the drab mist which lies upon the bosom of the plain. The yellow and red of the Spaniards becomes easily distinguishable, then the white and blue and gold of the French, the green of the arquebusiers, the black of the archers, and even that tiny moving speck, more brilliant even than the gleam of metal, the white banner of France, sewn with her fleur-de-lis. But the watchers up on the ramparts vainly strain their hollow eyes to see the man who has come to save Cambray. They can only guess that he is there, where the fight is fiercest, where death stands most grim and most relentless. They have a knowledge of his presence keener than sight can give, and though voices at this hour are spent and hoarse with pain, yet to every roar of cannon, to every volley of musketry, there comes, like an answering murmur, the triumphant call, which now sounds like a prayer, and which their hero taught them 4 months ago, fleur-de-lis and liberty. The French lancers and halberdiers rush the Spanish forts. The arquebusiers are fighting foot by foot. The musketeers and archers stand firm, a living wall, which deals death and remains unmoved, despite furious onslaughts from a foe who appears to be desperate. The plain around is already strewn with dead. The French have fought valiantly for close on 6 hours, have repelled 9 assaults against their positions, and now, at 1 hour after noon, they still stand or crouch or kneel on one knee, crossbow in hand or musket. They fire, fall out, reform, and fire again. Shaken, battered, decimated, they still shoot with coolness and precision, under the eye of one who never tires. Their ranks are still unbroken, but the Spaniards are giving ground at last. This time we are undone, Parma cries in the excess of his rage. He himself has been twice wounded, 4 of his young officers have been killed. The French musketeers, the finest the world has ever seen, work relentlessly upon his finest positions. And he feels, this great captain, who hitherto hath not known defeat, he feels that now at last he has met his match. Not a great leader like himself, perhaps, not the victorious general in 100 fights, but a man whose stubbornness and daring, whose blind disregard of danger and sublime defiance of evil fortune gives strength to the weakest and valor to the least bold. I thought you had rid me once of that pestilential rebel, he exclaims to de Landers, pointing to where Gilles de Crohin's tall figure towers above the pressing mass of Spanish halberdiers. De Landers murmurs an imprecation, crosses himself in an access of superstitious fear. My God, he says under his breath, he hath risen from the dead. In truth, Gilles appears endowed at this hour with superhuman strength. His doublet and jerkin are torn, his breastplate riddled with arrow shot, he bleeds profusely from the hand, his face is unrecognizable under a coating of smoke and grime. Enthusiasm and obstinacy have given him the power of giants. His hatred of the foe is supreme, his contempt of death sublime. De Landers sees in him the incarnation of his own retributive destiny. Oh, that God's thunder would smite him where he stands, he mutters fervently. "'Tis too late now," retorts Parma with ferocious spite. "Too late to call to God to help you. You should have bargained with the devil 4 months ago when you missed your aim. Risen from the dead, forsooth," he adds, purple with fury, "very much alive now, meseems, and with the strength of Satan in his arm." He strikes at de Landers with his sword, would have killed him with his own hand. So enraged is he with the man for his failure to murder an enemy whom he loathes and fears. "Unless those cowards rally," he calls savagely, and points to where, in the heart of the melee, confusion and disorder wield their grisly scepters, "we shall have to retreat." But de Landers does not stop to hear. The fear of the supernatural which had for the moment paralyzed his thinking faculties is soon merged in that boundless hatred which he feels for the rival whom he had thought dead long ago. In the heart of that confusion he has spied Gilles, fighting, pursuing, slashing, hitting, intrepid and superb, the center and the life of the victorious army. De Landers sets spurs to his horse, and calling to his own troop of swordsmen to follow, dashes into the melee. The battle now is at its fiercest. A proud army, superior in numbers, in arms, in knowledge, feels itself weakening before an enemy whose greatest power is his valor. The retreat has not yet sounded, but the Spanish captains all know that the humiliating end is in sight. Already their pikemen have thrown down their cumbersome weapons. Pursued by the French lancers, they turn and fight with hands and fists, some of them, whilst others scatter in every direction. The ranks of their archers are broken, and the fire of their musketeers has become intermittent and weak. Even the horsemen, the flower of Parma's army, gentlemen all, are breaking in the center. With reins loose, stirrup leathers flapping, swords cast away and mantles flying loose, they are making a stand which is obviously the last, and which within the next few minutes will with equal certainty turn into rout. Here it is that Gilles is holding his own with a small troop of French horsemen. His steel bonnet has been knocked off, his wounded arm roughly bandaged, the sleeves of his jerkin fly behind him like a pair of wings, his invincible sword strikes and flashes and gleams in the grey afternoon light. For a few seconds, while the distance between himself and his enemy grows rapidly less, de Landers sees and hears nothing. The blood is beating in his temples with a weird thumping which drowns the din of battle. His eyes are blinded by a crimson veil, his hand, stiff and convulsed, can scarcely grasp the pistol. The next instant, he is in the very thick of the turmoil. "For Spain and Our Lady," he cries, and empties his pistol into the seething mass of Spanish horsemen who bar the way twixt him and his enemy. The horsemen are scattered. Already on the verge of a stampede, they are scared by this unexpected onslaught from the rear. They fear to be taken between crossfires, are seized with panic, turn and flee to right and left. 2 of them fall, hit by that madman's pistol. All is now tumult and a whirling ferment. The air is thick with smoke and powder. Horses, maddened with terror, snort and struggle and beat the air with their hoofs. De Landers' own troop join in the melee. The French horsemen dash in pursuit. There is a scrimmage, a stampede. Men fight and tear and hit and slash for dear life and for safety. But de Landers does not care, is past caring now. Another disaster more or less, another scare, final humiliation, what matters? The day is lost anyhow, and all his own hopes finally dashed to the ground by the relief of Cambray and the irrevocable loss to him of Jacqueline and her fortune. Already he has thrown aside his smoking pistol, seized another from the hand of his nearest follower, and points it straight at Gilles. "For Spain and Our Lady. Fleur de Lis and liberty." The 2 cries rang out simultaneously. Then the report of de Landers' pistol, and Gilles' horse, hit in the neck, suddenly swerves, rears and paws the air, and would have thrown its rider had not the latter jumped clean out of the saddle. To de Landers' maddened gaze, the smoke around appears to be the color of blood. Blindly he gropes for another pistol. His henchman is near him, thrusts a weapon into the young Spaniard's trembling hand. For the fraction of a second, Destiny, waiting, stays her hand. Gilles is free of his struggling horse. He has his sword in his hand, but de Landers once more points a pistol straight at him. "Satan, guide thou my hand this time," he calls out in a passion of fury. Then suddenly a raucous cry rises above the din. There is a double sharp report, a loud curse, a final groan of despair and of rage, and de Landers, struck in the breast by an almost savage blow from a lance, throws up his arms, falls first on his knees, then backwards on the soft earth, would have been buried then and there under a seething mass of struggling men and beasts, had not Gilles rushed to him with one bound, caught him by the shoulders, and dragged his now lifeless body to comparative shelter a few paces away. Now Gilles picks up a fallen cloak from the ground and lays it reverently over his fallen foe. "Because Jacqueline loved you once," he murmurs under his breath. Then he turns to his faithful Jehan. "You were just in time," he says simply. Jehan has been glancing down with mingled rage and contempt on the man whom in his loyal heart he hated in life with a well-nigh ferocious intensity. Now he looks at his master, his friend whom he loves, sees him on one knee by the side of that abominable murderer, trying to struggle back to his feet, but evidently weak and dizzy. With a cry like an enraged tiger, Jehan casts his still streaming lance away, is already kneeling beside Gilles, supporting him in his arms as gently as a mother would shelter her child. "H hurt," he stammers laconically, "that DDD devil hit you." "Only in the thigh," replies Gilles. "You diverted his aim right enough, my dear Jehan, and once more I owe my life to you. Just help me to get up," he adds with his wonted impatience. "Do not let me miss another second of the glorious spectacle of our victory." Roman 3. Out in the western sky, a vivid band of blue and gold breaks the bosom of the clouds. The afternoon sun illumines with its glowing rays the final rout of the Spanish army. Le Carpentier's laconic words tell us more than any lengthy chronicle could do. "The Duke of Parma," he says curtly, "abandoned his forts and retired in haste to Valenciennes. So much that was mighty and great and invincible has succumbed before the power which comes from a sense of justice, from valor and enthusiasm and the decrees of God. God has decided that Cambray has suffered enough. He has broken the might of Parma and set an end to the miseries of an heroic people. And when, like a tidal wave of steel, the Spanish troops begin to oscillate toward the north, where lies Valenciennes and safety, up on the ramparts of Cambray hundreds of men and women and children fall on their knees and thank God with fervor for their freedom and for victory. They are too weak to shout, too weak even to raise their arms. The pikemen lean upon their arms, the musketeers upon their muskets, the gunners lie half-exhausted upon their culverins. Of the 25,000 citizens of Cambray, scarce 15,000 have remained to bid the returning hero welcome. Up in the fort of Cantimper, the city guard, what is left of it, wait for the entry of the victorious army. The bridge is lowered, the men stand as if on parade. The city fathers are there too, and amongst them stands Monseigneur the governor. Gaunt and careworn they all look. Their ranks too have been rudely thinned. Monseigneur's hair is now snow white. The hand with which he leans upon a stick is emaciated almost to the bone. His other arm rests on that of Jacqueline de Broyart, whose pale, wan face hath a curious air of mystery and of detachment. "Here they come," Monseigneur says at last, as on the horizon far away a glowing speck begins to move, to gather shape as it draws nearer, catching, reflecting, and throwing back the roseate flashes of the setting sun. The whole city now is watching. Her very soul is in the eyes of her expectant children. A curious, nervous thrill has taken the place of bodily exhaustion. Only Jacqueline stands quite silent and impassive. Boundless gratitude fills her heart for the deliverance of the city, but the overwhelming joy which she feels is drowned in the immensity of her sorrow. For her, in truth, life is gone, happiness lies buried beneath the city walls. She can rejoice at the coming of the man whom the people believe to be their hero, but for her he is the stranger. The real defender of Cambray, her brave and spotless knight, gave his precious life for her city all these weary months ago. People crowd more insistently round her. The speck on the horizon has become a moving multitude. Steel and gold flash in the evening light, banners wave in the gentle summer breeze. The French army, glorious after victory, wends its way to the city which it has saved. In the forefront march the halberdiers, with their blue hose and huge, unwieldy trunks, small bonnets on their heads, and a cloak about their shoulders. Then the pikemen, in striped doublets, their enormous hats slung behind their backs, and the musketeers with tall boots which reach halfway up their thighs. Immediately behind them comes a long train of carts and wagons, the provisions collected together for the starving city. The master of the camp is in charge of these. He is mounted on a black charger surrounded by his staff. The ends of his blue silk scarf are smothered in dust, as are his boots and his plumed hat. Some way behind the wagons, the archers come, marching 3 abreast, and then the foot soldiers with huge steel gauntlets covering their hands, their heavy lances borne upon their shoulders. Nearer and nearer the procession comes, and as it approaches, a strange exultation born of weakness and of fever rises in the hearts of the watchers. It seems as if an unendurable weight were lifted from their shoulders, as if they themselves had in a mysterious manner been dead for weeks and months, and now had risen again in order to gaze into the setting sun, from whence their liberator had come to them again. The streets are no longer deserted now. Furtive forms, gaunt and haggard, stand under doorways or congregate upon the open places. Women in ragged kirtles with children clinging to their skirts, sick and maimed and halt from disease and want, crawl out of the squalid houses to watch the entry of the French troops. Many, at sight of those brave men all covered with smoke and powder and dust, fall down on their knees, and a long-forgotten prayer rises to their lips. Anon down the Bapaume road, it is quite easy to perceive the white banner sewn with the gold fleur-de-lis. It is borne by a herald who sits upon a cream charger, and immediately behind him a man rides alone. He is hatless, but he holds his head erect and looks straight out towards the city. He has the reins of his horse in one hand, the other is hidden under his cloak. Some little way behind him ride a number of cavaliers in brilliant multicolored doublets and hose, with drawn swords in their hands, which flash and gleam in the setting sun. They are still close on half a league away, but adown the long, flat road Monseigneur's keen eyes have already perceived them. "It is His Highness the Duc d'Anjou," he exclaims. But with a strange instinct, which has forever remained inexplicable, Messire de Balagny retorts, "It is the Saviour of Cambray." And while he goes at once to transmit the governor's orders that all the church bells in the city shall at once begin to ring, Jacqueline de Broillart's gaze is fixed upon the road, which lies like a winding ribbon down below, stretching as far as the glowing horizon far away. The sky is suffused with a joy blush of crimson and orange and gold. The sinking sun illumines with a roseate hue that distant group of cavaliers, in the forefront of whom rides the defender of Cambray. After the turmoil of battle, an immense silence reigns over the bosom of the plain. Even the tramp of thousands of men, the clatter of horses' hoofs and of arms, seem like an integral part of that great and solemn silence, which has its birth in the stricken city. The victorious army has entered Cambray, not with music and with cheering, not with shouts of joy. Joy is in every heart, but an abundance of sorrow has stilled its outward expression. The plain itself is strewn with dead and wounded. Hundreds of valiant lives have been freely given for the deliverance of Cambray. Those that remain, some 5,000 of them, cross the bridge at the foot of Cantemper, marching 3 abreast. It takes an hour for the first portion of the victorious army to enter the city. The servicemen bring provision wagons in plenty, together with news that more will follow as quickly as may be. By nightfall, there would not be one hungry mouth left in Cambray. Relief, content, the shadow of happiness, are too poignant to find expression in words. Perhaps they have come just a little too late, but gratitude is immense. Soon the streets of Cambray are encumbered with train and equipment, with carts and wagons and barrows, horses loosely tethered, litters of straw for the wounded and the ailing. The distribution of the food is the most pressing need. Everywhere men in faded, ragged clothing, with gaunt faces and hollow eyes, hurry to the grand place and to the Marquet Aux Bois, where the food wagons are set up under the eye of the master of the camp. A pathetic procession of eager, half-starved shadows, women and children too, with the humble, deprecating air of the desperately indigent, crowd around the wagons, 15,000 mouths gaping for food. There is only a very little for everybody at first. More will come tonight, more again tomorrow. France, who has saved, will also provide. Of order there is none. People push and scamper as the hungry are wont to do, but all are too feeble to do one another much harm. The soldiers, flushed with victory, are patient and good-natured. My God, the very aspect of the streets is enough to make any staunch heart quake with horror. Some of the men have wife and family in far-off Artois or Provence. They can hardly restrain their tears as we, grimy hands, thin to the bone, are stretched out to them in pitiable eagerness. They are as lavish as they can be, giving up their own supper to feed these unfortunates, generous now as they were brave out there, when they fought under the eye of the staunchest man they had ever seen in battle. "'Tis a fine candle you folk of Cambray owe to Monseigneur de Froidmont," the master of the camp says to a group of burghers who, self-restrained and stoical, are giving help in the distribution, waiting till all the poor and the ignorant are fed before they themselves receive their share. "Monseigneur de Froidmont," one of them exclaims. "Why, who is he?" "Who is he?" retorts the master of the camp. "Nay, by the mass, he is above all the most doughty knight who hath ever wielded a sword. He it is who has saved your city for you, my friends. If the Spanish soldiery is not inside your walls this night, 'tis to him that ye owe it, remember." Most of the burghers look gravely puzzled. Their spokesman ventures on the remark. "To His Highness, the Duc d'Anjou, surely." The master of the camp shrugs his shoulders. "That is as it may be," he says dryly, "but you might all have rotted inside your walls but for the valor of Monseigneur de Froidmont." "But the Duc d'Anjou," hazards someone timidly. A murrain on the Duc d'Anjou, breaks in the master of the camp good-humoredly. "'Tis of the defender of your city you should think at this hour." "Ah," he exclaims, with a sigh of satisfaction, "'tis good to hear that your city fathers at the least are giving him a rousing welcome." He himself sets up a cheer, which is taken up by his soldiers, for just then the bells of Notre Dame have begun their joyous peal. Soon Sti, Croix follows suit, and St. Jerry from the heights toward the north. Peal after peal resounds, till the whole air vibrates with that most inspiriting sound, chasing away with its melody the very shadow of silence and desolation. The last rays of the sun have now sunk in the west. Twilight is slowly fading into dusk. Out beyond Cantimper, the herald upon his charger has halted at the foot of the bridge. The white banner of France, gay with its golden fleur-de-lis, is gently stirred by the evening breeze. The group of cavaliers has halted too, while the defender of Cambray rides slowly into the city. Roman forward. Monseigneur, the governor, awaited the victor in the courtyard of the citadel. He stood in the midst of his sheriffs and his provosts and the other dignitaries of the city, all of them still dignified and imposing, despite the faded appearance of their clothes and the gaunt, hungry look in their wan faces. All around the courtyard was lined with troops, the mere remnants of the garrison who had fought so valorously on that never-to-be-forgotten day in April, a little over 4 months ago, and of the small body of French troops who had come to their assistance then. Gilles dismounted at the bridgehead, disdaining, despite his wounds, the aid of his faithful henchman's arm. Only limping very slightly, the bandage on his hand hidden in the folds of his cloak, he passed in on foot and alone under the gateway. For the space of one heartbeat he paused just inside the courtyard, when he saw before him this large concourse of people who, at his appearance, had slowly dropped on their knees. They were for the most part faces which had been familiar to him all those months ago, faces which even now wore an expression of deference and of awed respect. A bitter sigh rose to Gilles' lips. For him, despite the grandeur of his victory, this was a bitter hour. Within the next few moments, these proud and brave people would have to be told that a prince of the House of France had proved himself to be both fickle and base. Monsieur de Balagny was not there, and at first he did not see Jacqueline. She had retired into the guardroom at the desire of her guardians. It was seemly, they had said, that we, your protectors, should first receive His Highness and pay him our respects. Then he will ask for his future bride, and ours shall be the honor of bringing you to him. So she was not there for the moment, and Gilles felt freer in her absence, even caught himself hoping that he would not be put to the torture of seeing her again. It were best for him, and best for her, that she should not hear that awful confession from his lips, that a Valois prince had broken his word to her, and in his wanton infamy had repudiated the perfect gift of God which had been offered to him. "Do not tarry one moment, Monsieur," Marguerite de Navarre had entreated of him at the last. "Take advantage of the moment of boundless relief and gratitude when your victorious troops enter Cambray to release Monsieur of his promise to wed the Flemish heiress. Do not enter the city till you have made it clear to the Flemish lords that the Duc d'Anjou will accept the sovereignty of the Netherlands, and in exchange will give the support of France, of her wealth, and of her armies, but that he will not enter into personal alliance with one of his future subjects. So now, when at Gilles approached the governor and the city fathers all bent the knee before him, he said at once, directly and simply, "I entreat you, messeigneurs, not to kneel to me. That honor belongs by right only to the puissant prince whom I represent." "Your Highness," began Dinchi humbly. "I am no highness, monseigneur," he rejoined firmly. "Only the servant of the Duc d'Anjou, who will be here as soon as may be, to claim from you that gratitude which you owe to him and not to me." Dinchi and the others did not move. Their limbs were paralyzed, their lips dumb. Their ears refused to convey to their overtired brains that which they had just heard. It all seemed like a dream. The gathering dusk made everything appear unreal. The ringing of the joy bells, the faraway crowd of soldiers and cavaliers who filled the very air with clatter and jingle of spurs and accoutrements, with creaking of wagons, snorting of horses and snatches of songs and laughter. And in the center of the courtyard, this tall figure of a man, with the tattered doublet and the bleeding hand, and the voice which seemed as if it rose straight out of a glorious grave. "Do not look so puzzled, messeigneurs," Gilles went on with a smile half-sad, wholly good-humored. "The Duc d'Anjou will not tarry, my word on it. He bids me say that he accepts the sovereignty of the Netherlands and will place at the disposal of her people the might and the armies of France, his own power, wealth, and influence." Still as in a dream, Dinchi and the sheriffs and the provosts staggered to their feet. The mystery, in truth, was greater than their enfeebled minds could grasp. They were for the most part chiefly conscious of a great feeling of disappointment. Here stood before them, tall and magnificent even beneath rags and grime, the man whom they revered above all others, the hero whose personality was enshrined in the very hearts of the people of Cambray. What the mystery was which clung round him they did not know, nor did they care. He was the man of their choice, the savior of Cambray now, as he had been their defender in the hour of their gravest peril. The victor of this glorious day was the hero of the ramparts on that memorable April day, the man who 4 months ago had defended them with heart and will and undaunted courage then, and to whom they owed their freedom, the honor of their wives and daughters, and the future of their race. To think of him as other than the Duc d'Anjou, their chosen sovereign lord, the husband of Jacqueline de Broyart, was positive pain. Most of them even now refused to believe, stared at Gilles as if he were a wraith set to mock them in their weakness and their dependence. "Not the Duc d'Anjou," the chief magistrate murmured, "impossible." Gilles could not help but smile at the farcical aspect of his own tragedy. "It is not only possible, messeigneurs," he said, "but is e'en a positive fact. Mescar de Balagny would soon tell you so, and His Highness the Duc d'Anjou himself will be here on the morrow to prove to you that I am but an humble substitute, a representative of his graciousness." "But," stammered Dinchi, still in a state of complete bewilderment, "that day in April, you, monseigneur, in the town hall, Madame Jacqueline." With a quick gesture, Gilles put up his hand. "I entreat you, monseigneur," he said earnestly, "to wait a while ere you probe further into His Highness' secrets. For the moment, will you not be content to rejoice with me at your deliverance? His Highness accepts from you the sovereignty of the Netherlands. Tomorrow he will be here, ready to receive the acclamations and the welcome of his people. He hath proved himself not only ready, but able to defend you against all your enemies. He hath this day gained a signal victory over the powerful armies of the King of Spain. Henceforth, the whole might of France will stand between you and the relentless foe who threatens your lives and your liberties. Join me, messeigneurs," he concluded earnestly, "in acclaiming His Highness the Duc d'Anjou et de Lenken, Prince of the House of France, as your sovereign lord." His inspiring words were received in silence. Not one voice was raised in response to his loyal call. Gilles frowned, feeling that the supreme hour had come. A moment or two longer, and the inevitable question would be put. And what of Madame Jacqueline, monseigneur? What of the lady whom His Highness has sworn to wed? Already he had steeled himself to give answer, though the answer could only proclaim dishonor, both for himself and for the Valois prince whom he was trying so faithfully to serve unto the end. He saw the frown of puzzlement which gathered on Dinchi's brow. The governor, in truth, was the first to recover his presence of mind. Leaning upon his stick, with back bent, but his whole attitude one of supreme dignity, he came nearer to Gilles and fixed a stern gaze upon his face. "If you are not the Duc d'Anjou, Monseigneur," he said slowly, "will you tell us who it was who defended Cambray with such indomitable valor 4 months ago? Will you tell us who it is that saved Cambray today? For of a truth, my friends and I are bewildered, and the mystery before us is one which we cannot fathom. Therefore I dare ask you once again in all respect, I may say in all affection, if you are not the Duc d'Anjou, who is it that stands before me now?" "The savior of Cambray," came in a clear, ringing voice from the further end of the courtyard, "my promised lord and king." The sound of Jacqueline's voice sent a spark of living flame through those minds, atrophied by all this mystery. All eyes were at once turned to where she stood, dimly outlined in the gathering gloom. She was clad in a sombre gown and wore a dark veil over her fair hair. Her young, girlish figure, free from the hideous trammels of hoops or farthingale, appeared ethereal against the background of grim, frowning walls. Only the last lingering grey light in the west brought into bold relief her pale face and graceful shoulders, smooth like ivory. Just for a minute or two she stood quite still, like an exquisitely graven image, rigidly still yet pulsating with life. Then she advanced slowly towards Gilles. Her eyes held his, and he scarcely dared to breathe, for fear that perfect vision should vanish into the skies, whence of a truth it must have descended. He could not have uttered a word then, if his very existence had depended on it. It seemed to him as if his very heart had stopped in its beating, as if life and time and the whole universe was stilled, while Jacqueline's blue eyes sought his own, and she came, with hands extended as if in entreaty, to him. Was it a minute or a cycle of years? He himself could not tell you. He saw nothing of what went on around. The city walls had fallen away, the men in their somber clothes become mere shadows, the very sky overhead had receded into the realm of nothingness. And through that state of semi-consciousness, her exquisite voice came to him as from another world. "Nay, my dear lord," she said, with her enchanting smile, "you'll not refuse me the joy of paying something of my country's eternal debt of gratitude to you." He still stood half-dazed and silent. Then suddenly he took her hands and slowly bent the knee and buried his battle-stained face in her sweet-scented palms. It had all occurred within 6 seconds. The governor, the chief magistrate, the city fathers gazed on uncomprehending, silent and puzzled at what they saw. After a while, Dinchi murmured vaguely, "Madame Jacqueline, that is." But quickly now she turned and faced them all, while Gilles still knelt and rested his hot forehead against her cool white hand. Through the gloom they could just discern her face, white and serene, and withal defiant and firm, and irradiated with an enormous happiness. "Messieurs," she said with solemn earnestness, "you heard 2 se'nights ago the profession of faith which I made publicly before the assembled people of Cambray. There I swore by the living God who made me that I would cherish and serve, loyally and faithfully, even until death, the noble and valorous hero who defended our city in the hour of her gravest peril. That dauntless hero is before you now. Once again he has saved our city from destruction, our sisters from dishonor, our men from shame. To him did I plight my troth, to him alone will I be true." Then, as all the men around her remained silent, moved to the depth of their hearts by the sublime note of passion which rang through her avowal, she continued, and this time with a note of unswerving defiance and magnificent challenge in her voice. "Ask the people of Cambray, messieurs, let them be the arbiters of my fate and their own. Ask them to whom they would have me turn now, to the mighty prince who would only use me and them and our valiant race as stepping stones to his own ambition, or to the hero who has offered his life for us all." A low murmur went round the assembly. Grave heads were shaken, toil-worn hands were raised to wipe a furtive tear. The evening gloom descended upon this strange scene, upon the reverend seigneurs and the stolid soldiers, upon the man who was kneeling and the woman, a mere girl, who stood there, commanding and defiant, secure in her love, proud of her surrender, ready to fight for her happiness. "Ask the people of Cambray, messieurs," she reiterated boldly, if you have a doubt. She let her eyes wander slowly over the crowd. One by one, she looked these grave seigneurs in the face, these men who arrogated the right to rule over her destiny. They were her friends, had been her daily companions in the past 4 months of horror and of misery. They had trembled with her over Cambray's danger, had wept with her over Cambray's woes. With her they had acclaimed the hero who had defended them, had wept when they saw him fall, and today, again today, had been ready to deify him as their hero and her knight. "Mes seigneurs," she pleaded, "ask the people of Cambray." She knew what would be the people's answer. Now that the hour of their liberty had struck, now that the Spaniard no longer thundered at their gates, they were ready to carry their liberator shoulder high and give him the universe in their gratitude, if they had it to give. What cared they if their liberator was a duc d'Anjou or a nameless knight? He was the man whom they worshipped, the man who had made them free. And now, when she still saw doubt, hesitation, embarrassment upon the face of all these grave dignitaries, she frowned with wounded pride and with impatience. "Mes seigneurs," she said boldly, "heaven forgive me, but ye seem to hesitate. The man to whom you owe your life, your future, the honor of your name, asks nothing more of your gratitude. But I, who am privileged to read in his heart, know that it is in my power to repay him in full for all that he hath done. And yet you hesitate. I am content to make appeal to the people of Cambray, but I know too what goes on in your minds. Ye think that ye are pledged to Monsieur Duc d'Anjou, that Jacqueline de Broyart, if she refused to wed him, would sully your honor, and what were infinitely worse, would besmirch the fair fame of Flanders. Isn't that so, mes seigneurs?" Their silence had become eloquent. "The honor of Flanders," Monseigneur began, then paused. A premonition of something which he could not put into words caused him to remain silent too, and to let the girl plead her cause without any interruption from him. "The honor of Flanders, as you say, Monseigneur," Jacqueline went on firmly, "demands above all things that you and I and the guardians of our city do keep our word. Therefore, even before we make appeal to the people of Cambray, we will ask Monseigneur de Froidmont, who is here on behalf of His Highness, the Duc d'Anjou, to renew in His Highness' name the demand of my hand in marriage. On his answer should depend our future conduct. Is that not so, mes seigneurs?" she asked once again, and let her calm gaze wander from one solemn face to the other, search serenely every troubled eye. Dinchi this time realized that he must be the spokesman for all these representatives, his city and of his province. Vaguely troubled still by the mystery which surrounded the man to whom Cambray owed her deliverance, he thought once for all, by a straight question, to put an end to the many doubts and fears which assailed him and his friends. Jacqueline already had turned once more to Gilles. With a slight pressure of her hand, she asked him to rise. This he did, feeling strangely elated, just as if destiny, tired of buffeting him, was smiling encouragingly to him from afar. In the midst of the many confused impressions which had struck his wearied mind during the past quarter of an hour, one thought stood out with heavenly clearness. Jacqueline loved him. Her love had neither faltered nor tired through these weary months. She was as steadfast and true to him at this hour as she had been when in the clematis-covered arbor she had lain against his breast. Now her woman's quick wit had divined the truth and come to the aid of her love. Even when she challenged those grave seigneurs to ask him the straight and momentous question, she knew what his answer would be. The task which lay before him no longer seemed irksome and humiliating. He still blushed for the shame which rested on the fickle prince whom he served, but already in his heart he had registered the vow that, God helping as he had done hitherto, the honor of France should shine forth before these heroic people, in all its brightness and glory, through the glorious deeds of her sons. "Monseigneur," began Dinchi tentatively, "you have heard what Madame Jacqueline de Broyart hath said. We have all passed through much sorrow, have witnessed the miseries and the patience of our people. The hour of victory has come, but found us weak in body and tortured in mind. We place our faith with complete confidence in the honor and integrity of France. We are prepared to receive His Highness, the Duc d'Anjou, with open hearts, and to acclaim him as our sovereign lord. Will he in exchange keep faith with us and wed our ward, Madame Jacqueline de Broyart, to whom he hath acredly plighted his troth?" Even while the governor spoke, The city dignitaries all tried to read the expression on Gil's face through the fast-gathering gloom, and anxious eyes scanned those war-worn features which they had learned to love. Even through the darkness they could see him, standing there in his rags and his battered breastplate, hatless and begrimed, splendid in his valor and his pride, and with Jacqueline's hand held tightly in his own, splendid still, now that he stood silent and shamed before them all. To Monseigneur's peremptory question he had given no reply, remained almost motionless, while Jacqueline, proud in the face of the crying insult which a faithless prince had put upon her, threw back her head and gave a deep sigh of content. Monseigneur the governor had received his answer in Gilles de Crohin's obstinate silence. A bitter cry of unbridled anger rose to his lips. His emaciated hand trembled visibly upon the stick which he held. Then just as suddenly, his wrath gave way. It almost seemed as if an angel of reconciliation and of love had whispered into his ear, and had, with cool and gentle fingers, smoothed away the angry frown upon his brow. All that was fine and noble in the heroic race from which he sprang clamored for the only possible solution of the present difficulty, a solution which would ensure the happiness of a brave and proud woman and the dignity of the country which he represented. One last second of hesitation, one final regretful sigh for the ambitious personal schemes which he saw crumbling into ashes at his feet. Then Monseigneur d'Inchy, governor of Cambray, sank slowly down on his knees. "Monseigneur," he said slowly and impressively, "Madame Jacqueline de Broyat has spoken and shown us the path of our duty. Tomorrow we will acclaim His Highness the Duc d'Anjou et de Lincoln as our sovereign lord, but today we welcome you as the savior of our city. Whatever your wishes are, they are a law unto us. You have heard what Madame Jacqueline has said. Will you in your turn plight your troth to her? Will you love and cherish her and serve her faithfully and loyally as her liege lord until death?" "And beyond," Gilles murmured softly. The last streak of grey light was still lingering in the sky. Everything in the enclosure of the tall, grim walls became mysterious and shadowy. Darkness drew her kindly mantle over the scene. She hid from prying eyes what went on under the immediate shadow of the great gate, where for one brief moment Jacqueline lay against her loved one's heart. From the towers of the city's churches, the bells were still sending their happy carillon through the evening air. A group of pikemen brought torches into the courtyard. A wild shout of delight, the first which Cambray had heard for many months, sent its joyous sound through the evening air. And in the homes which all these months of misery had devastated, the sick and the weary roused themselves for a moment, marveling what these shouts of joy might mean. And those who had suffered for so long and who were now comforted, those who had been hungry and were now fed, ran into the houses of sickness and of sorrow in order to bring the gladsome, the great, the wonderful news. The Duc d'Anjou, brother of the King of France, is to be sovereign lord of the Netherlands. He will enter Cambray tomorrow with his great army. He will be proclaimed protector of the liberties of Cambray and sovereign of the Cambresis. And he will wed Madame Jacqueline de Broyat, the great heiress, our Jacqueline. Oh no, the Duc d'Anjou will be our sovereign lord, but Madame Jacqueline will wed the savior of Cambray.